It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, 1 a.m. in Hong Kong, 4 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 11:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young. The IPO-VID Livestream, Series 23, Episode 1, that is in the aggregate, Episode 133 starts here. And let's say, first of all, a huge get well soon to our dear friend, Neil Crammond. Neil has had a bit of an accident. He was last seen with all sorts of dodgy things being stuck up his nose, etc., etc. But I'm delighted to say he's reporting that he's getting incredible care, from the good staff of Epsom Hospital. We wish you all the very, very best, Neil. And indeed, I'm sure you're probably watching IPO-VID on occasion. But when you're watching this, get well soon, Neil. Thanks very much for being a guest in the past as well. We look forward to seeing you soon. Meanwhile, the EU, the temerity of it all. I mean, exchanges are now being blamed for not being competitive in a free market. Now, MiFID was the one good thing that the European Union did right, but thereafter they've done a heck of a lot of things absolutely wrong. MiFID 2, described by Jeff Sprecher as the worst piece of legislation he'd seen in his entire career, for instance. So now what we've got is the European Union's ECOFIN, FinMins, are sending around memos suggesting that actually the problem and the reason that capital market union doesn't work, it's got nothing to do with the fact that there's not a single European passport for listing your companies. It's got nothing to do with all the incredible amounts of red tape and bureaucracy. No, it's because there are too many stock exchanges. How absolutely ridiculous and what utter tosh, bearing in mind the fact that there are actually more large stock exchanges in the USA than there are in the European Union. Why not stimulate markets by trimming those 5,000 European Union banks down to a more manageable number? For reference, the US has about 4,300 banks, while European Union GDP is only 72% of America's. What about helping the capital markets go more 80-20 in terms of funding provision like the US, as opposed to the 80% done by that banking blob? This crazy EU blame storming is the order of the day and really infuriates me because nobody knows what to do to help the European Union 27 recover from their lost decade and a half. Don't forget those numbers. And actually, we have an update. Overall, GDP in the Eurozone, EU overall in the Eurozone, plus 9%. US plus 86%. That's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. And Rafael Plata made a fabulous point in last week's IPO-VID. The EU 27 is sitting on 14.3 trillion euros in bank deposits. Why don't the FinMins have a proper plan to get that invested instead of lying quasi-fallow in those 5,000 banks? Finally today, let's open up with TMX. Great news, fresh from acquiring the remaining 78% of US-based Vetify. TMX's chairman, Luc Bertrand, has a southern-focused ATS move akin to his box shuffle south of the border back during his Montreal days. Very interesting. TMX Group planning an ATS for US equities, a big leap in their expansion strategy. Making a big leap today, we are delighted to be discussing the fabulous topic of unlocking Namibian growth. Our guest is Tiaan Bazuin. Tiaan is an entrepreneurial qualified lawyer. He's been the CEO of the Namibian Stock Exchange since 2013, an MD of the Central Securities Depository and MD of Birdsong Properties, a real estate developing company situated outside of Windhoek, the capital city of Namibia. Tiaan is chairman of the CoSSE Legal Sub-committee and serves on the board of trustees of NMC, Namibia Medical Care. Previously in a star-studded career, Tiaan was the chief legal officer and company secretary of Leo, a subsidiary of Erascom Telecom. Tiaan, welcome to the show. I suspect I may have got a slight hint of where you are, but where in the world are you today?
Patrick, thank you for having me. I'm sitting in a rainy Windhoek, the capital of Namibia. For those that don't know, Namibia is a country in southern Africa, just north of South Africa. It's a country more than 800,000 square kilometers large, with a population of less than 2.5 million people. So it's one of the least densely populated places on Earth.
It's quite an incredible number, that altogether. I mean, what does that put you in perspective? As a landmass, how big is Namibia compared to other countries, roughly?
Oof, that's going to be larger than quite a few of your European countries. Compared to South Africa, it's about 2/3 the size of South Africa.
Right. 2/3 the size of South Africa. So in other words, therefore, you're about the size of a third of the European Union 27's total landmass, something like that.
Exactly. For
Something
2.5
along those
million
lines.
people.
For 2.5 million people, for essentially just slightly more than the population, just about the population of Latvia. You've essentially got the same sort of thing. I mean, those are absolutely incredible numbers altogether for Namibia. Now, so tell me, I mean, your origin story. I mean, how did you get into financial markets? I mean, I'm presuming you were born in Namibia.
Born in South Africa, actually. Immigrated to Namibia, what about almost 25 years ago now. Studied in South Africa, met my wife there. She's initially from Namibia. Started off here. I actually did economics first and then law. Interestingly enough, did my thesis on insider trading in my first degree, which was slightly odd at the time, but it was interesting. Came to Namibia, started off as a criminal prosecutor, was a magistrate. Then I went into the private sector, went into banking, ended up pitching for the finance of the second telecommunications license in Namibia. Started as part of that team in the startup phase, built the network, arranged the finance with the banks that actually got the tender to finance the deal, and ended up being part of the team that sold that telco to Rascom. And after that transaction, got the call saying I might be useful at the exchange. Shadowed the existing CEO for a while and ended up taking over. And I've been there ever since.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about the Namibian Stock Exchange. How old is it and how does it operate?
Last year we had our 30th anniversary. So very much in line with the independence of Namibia. Mm-hmm. The exchange started shortly after Namibia became independent. Namibia used to be a sea mandate country under the control of South Africa. So since independence, then a couple of companies, local Namibian companies, actually contributed funds to start our own stock exchange. So we have 43 founder members, which makes our association a little bit different from many other typical associations. And then the brokers being the trading members within that. So that's 30 years. And by total market capitalization, and I say that specifically to be clear, we have a lot of dual listings or secondary listings, but by total market cap, we are the second biggest in Africa. If we only look at our local companies, then we are the sixth largest.
That's quite an incredible series of numbers still. I mean, that's remarkable to be sixth largest in Africa by market cap, given the relative paucity of population. It's quite an incredible number.
Yes. Namibia has a couple of industries where it really punches above its weight. So our financial services are certainly are very, very highly rated, but our mining sector is certainly the uranium side is very large. We are the third or fourth largest producer of uranium in the world. We also have alluvial diamonds, which are some of the highest quality in the world. So we've had a lot of good things that have been working in our favor historically, but that's very, very much part of the growth story, certainly. But the biggest exciting thing that's been happening in the last year, or actually that's been happening for the last 25 years, because that's how long Shell has been drilling for oil off our coast, is that they actually found it. So Shell and Total Energies have both confirmed at least 8 billion barrels each of oil offshore. So there's a bit of a gold rush currently going on. And maybe if we can just put on some of those slides that I sent you earlier, I can talk through those. So after COVID, maybe I should touch on that first. With COVID, we saw, at least from a stock exchange side, we saw the international funds just disappear, and not only out of Namibia, but really out of Africa as a whole. There were a couple of ETFs and equity funds that pulled out of Africa in one go, which cost a lot. let me just ask you to put on the slides.
That's all right. No, could we have the slides, please, production? Here we
there
go. Thank you very much.
So what happened during that time is there was a wholesale sell-off from the international funds, and almost all the African indices took like a 30% hit. Not because there was necessarily fundamentals changing in our listed companies, but those funds just left and they haven't really come back. So our investors haven't necessarily seen the pivot that we've seen in many other indices and many other countries in their exchanges. But if we look at this slide that I'm putting up here, and thanks to Central Securities, one of our local stockbroking companies, they did a fair amount of research they presented last night, and I'm using their slides. The foreign direct investment numbers, and I know this seems odd the way it's presented going down, but down is good in this case. That's just what's happened in the last year in terms of foreign direct investment, and that's largely on two fronts. It's the uranium and on the mining sector, and then there was a large transaction where Heineken bought out a substantial stake in our local brewery. But then we see that there's more and more interest, and people, and now the consultants and expats and everybody are starting to come in for the oil and gas sector. And that's the oil finds that they've already had, but also the potential for green hydrogen, which is being looked at very seriously, and that the EU is also looking at quite strongly with potential funding on that one.
That's fascinating altogether, and quite an incredible change for the country with all of the oil coming out. And so how does that imply or impact upon the rest of the country? I suppose there's probably a slide for that as well, please.
Yes. Oh, we'll keep going. So this is what we saw with the uranium price. Now, Namibia has lots of uranium, but it's fairly low grade. So typically, many of the mines are only viable at around the $70 price. So what's happened in the last year, and remember, after Fukushima, the uranium price dropped to next to nothing. Mm-hmm. And most of the potential mines were all put either on care and maintenance, or the projects just stalled where they were. And we're seeing a lot of that kicking back in. So as soon as these types of activities have an immediate spillover effect from whatever the direct investment is, but to the greater economy, with the uranium mines often being at the coast, you see that pick up very quickly in the local economies there. And what we expect with the oil side is, as much as the consultants are currently at the coast looking at the design and the setup that they'll do for the extraction, is you're going to see the capital pick up on the property market and multiple other ones. So if we go to the next slide there.
Mm-hmm. Carry on.
So here we go on the oil exploration side. That gives you an indication where some of the activity is starting to spike. So the uranium is the obvious one, but if you look at the rest of the lines, you can see where there was almost nothing in other, it's picked up already quite a bit. And that takes me to the next one, which is what was interesting when I saw it last night. Oh, not this one yet. Sorry, this is just off the coast, the map that actually shows the blocks where the different companies are exploring. And like I say, so Shell and Total Energies have confirmed holdings already, but they believe there's a lot more. And some of the smaller blocks around there have also now shown positive holdings. So there might be a lot more, but if we're talking about 15 billion to start with, that's not a bad start.
No.
So if we move over to that next one. So this is the case study that I saw last night that I thought was really interesting. So Guyana is probably not comparable to Namibia in many ways, but in terms of its GDP and the effect that an oil discovery had on theirs, I think is probably an interesting point of reference to look at. And I think most Namibians are still coming to terms of what this could mean to the greater economy once we get to the point of extraction, and even just before that, the investment, the people coming, the expansion. We've had examples in the region with Angola having had oil for a long time, while not necessarily having a huge benefit to the broader population. Namibia has a history of being able to partner with the private sector, as government did in our diamond industry. They have a partnership with De Beers, which has been working very well for a long time. So I hope that something similar can happen in this scenario, where it can be to the greater benefit of the general population and not just stay in the hands of a few. So if we'll run
Yes,
to
it's a
the next slide
fascinating.
on that one,
Hmm.
that was just the GDP impact. But what's
Right.
interesting is what happened to the stock exchange after that type of investment and those types of returns came through. I think that should be the next slide. There we go.
Wow.
So that's what happened in Guyana. Now that's that's interesting, because that's on everything that was listed there. So it's not a case of only the mining companies or only the logistics companies or something having a benefit. That spillover just goes through on everything. So it's a rising tide that raises all boats. And
Yeah.
I think this is where it gets interesting, because if you're looking at Namibia as an investment destination, then almost, I mean, if you start looking at the individual stocks, you're probably going to find benefits within the next couple of years to almost all of them, if not all of them. And this is where I think it's very interesting from an exchange perspective, certainly, in terms of where the growth can come from, and the inward investment into the country that can be amazing. But sorry, there
That's quite
I'll give you a
stunning.
chance to say something, because I've
No,
stopped there.
that's stunning. I mean, certainly the Guyanese example I thought was one that's a very, very, very good corollary, although it's not in Africa and it's more swampy, but at the same time than desert. But at the same time, it's remarkably similar, because actually both have got relatively small populations with a very significant land mass pro rata to the population. Population density is very, very low. And certainly it is incredible to see what's been going on. I mean, I noticed that, yeah, just the other, what was it? I think the last quarter, one of the quarters last year was like 25% GDP growth, which is quite sensational. But it is interesting, the point you make of the fact that when you discover oil like that, it can benefit the whole economy rather than just going to a group of oligarchs or a particular privileged enterprise or whatever, because it really raises the attention of everybody. So, I mean, that's very exciting for you as an exchange. Tell me, I mean, just answer me a couple of simple questions. So what currency do you trade in at the moment?
Okay, so Namibia has as a currency the Namibia dollar, which is pegged 1-to-1 for the South African rand. So like I said earlier, with our financial services being quite developed, part of the reason is that there's a lot of access and a lot of direct cross-border trading and all kinds of interaction with the South African market, which is the biggest in the region by quite a lot. So we currently, the currency is pegged to the rand. I think we would struggle to have our own floating currency
Mm-hmm.
in our current economic situation. Not to say that that can't change over time. The rand has been one of the most volatile international currencies in the world for quite some time. There are certainly challenges in South Africa that doesn't bode well for the rand in the longer term. So if all this pans out, then obviously that can come up for re-evaluation, whether it's the best idea to stick around with that current arrangement.
Okay, no, it's interesting. And therefore, how easy is it to transfer money in and out of the Namibian dollar if you're a foreign investor?
Oh, it's very easy because there aren't any restrictions. So
Okay.
for locals, there's exchange control requirements, but for foreign investors, if they bring the funds in through the appropriate channels, it's not difficult to do. Then they're entitled to take all of it out again without any restrictions. So our taxing regime, in fact, is fairly attractive compared to the region. There is some withholding tax on dividends, but there's no capital gains tax. So
Okay.
investments in and out is very easy in that sense.
Well, that's very attractive, obviously, for a lot of investors, because then it sounds to me a little bit like somewhere like the Bahamas, where they've got the Bahama dollar. But again, as long as you're papered up, putting your money in, it's no difficulty to get your money out as you go along, which is very exciting. And just to go back, your ownership structure of the exchanges, you're essentially, your shareholders are these, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the number. Was it 41 original founders plus the members? Is that right?
Yeah, so we are still a not-for-profit association. We've been waiting for the appropriate legislation and regulatory framework for us to demutualize. It's a project we've been working on. It is our intent to demutualize. So yes, technically, the ownership would vest there. However, we've never paid anything out to our founders or to the stockbrokers. the way we were set up, unlike some of the other exchanges, was not the old boys club where they can raid the piggy bank every year. So all the excess, not to call them profits, but the reserves have built up over time. So we are completely cash self-sufficient, and we have substantial reserves because of that. So once we go to become a listed entity, then that could change. But we have independent corporates, a corporate governance structure. So it's not that the exchanges actually, or that the stockbrokers control the exchange. We have an independent board with some stockbroker representation, but it's independent.
Very interesting altogether. And then remind me, if I remember correctly, you've got a very funky setup for your technology, Tiaan, as well.
Yeah, that's certainly probably the biggest differentiator from us with anybody in the region, and maybe most of the world. Because we realized that we would be running on very low volumes and not have a lot of listed companies, especially in the beginning. At the time, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange made an offer to the African exchanges, specifically the Southern African ones, to make use of their trading system, basically to outsource the technical side of it. So we regulate the market, we surveillance it, we supervise, we approve, we do all of that. But our brokers access the trading system of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, where the NSX is actually a separate board on that system. So it's a multi-tenant system, and we make use of their technology. That's been a very successful low-cost solution for us. Instead of having to go and buy systems, which the licensing and everything else can be quite cost prohibitive, it certainly used to be very much so. And that served us very well. So we have a partnership with them. It works well. Again, the currency is pegged, so it was very easy to do cross-border payments, settlements, and everything else. Even especially on the dual listed stocks, which clears and settles in South Africa and straight in their CSD.
Right.
So that's an interesting one, which I don't think many exchanges have followed. Certainly no one else did at the time. But it was more difficult at the time for the other exchanges that weren't in the same currency. Now there's a cross-border payment system that actually facilitates that a lot better. So the theory actually has now practical, or could be more practical for more exchanges to do a similar type of thing. But it's worked very well for us.
That's fascinating altogether. It's a really, really interesting and innovative approach. And also, as you say, it's really good for you because you just don't have the total hassle, let alone the cost of trying to manage the tech stack and upgrade it and update it and keep having to talk to vendors all the time. Lovely and cuddly as vendors are, of course, I'll always say. But no, but it is a huge amount of aggravation when you've got to go through those stages. Whereas, to be fair, Johannesburg have got an incredible amount of experience in dealing with that sort of technology stack built up over 20, 30, 40 years. And let's face it, they've been going, 130 years or something thereabouts as a stock exchange, which is quite an achievement. Whereas you're coming in as, well, I didn't actually realize last year you were celebrating your 30th anniversary. So same year as Kazakhstan Stock Exchange, in fact. And we had Alina Aldenbergian talking about that last year. Let me just pop to our messages. We've got a lovely message from Mary, sending love to IPO-VID tonight, watching all the way from across the globe. Thank you very much, Mary. Now, do remember, leave us a like, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this show. Very simple reason: artificial intelligence loves likes. So if you can drop a little bit of love into your screen, whether you're watching us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, the most important thing is it allows the algorithm to appreciate just how useful it is to have this conversation with Tiaan Bazuin, unlocking Namibia's growth, and realize what an exciting story there is out there. So, I mean, Tiaan, your exchange, you have a CSD of your own, or how does that work or interact to Straight?
So for the dual listed stocks, where a lot of our trading takes place, that settles and clears in Straight in South Africa. For our local holdings, we're still on a certificated basis, again waiting for the same legislation and regulation for a while. For our CSD, we have now finally gotten to the point where we were able to launch our application to our regulator for the CSD. That's the rules have been circulated, the market's been fully informed. So that's a project we're kicking off. Hopefully we can get the license this year and then make some progress on that. Part of that process was also to other than the Johannesburg Stock Exchange arrangement that we have, was to also launch our own trading system for bonds. that we launched last year. So that's in its infancy now. But the next step will be to move forward on the CSD, to launch that as well, and to dematerialize the market. We went through this process. Like I said, the legislative struggles were there. Our legislation sometimes takes a long time to just go through the process. So we've been waiting for that. But even while we were waiting for that, we got full membership of the World Federation of Exchanges last year as well, which again sets us up well for potential investors going forward, because it makes it easier for them to invest in Namibia without having to go through a physical due diligence process.
Yes, that's a very interesting point. One of the few things that I think the World Federation of Exchanges still offers as a useful service to its members, and it helps accelerate you be more approachable. So tell us a little bit about the bond market that you built last year, because that was a very exciting launch.
Yeah, so the trading system. It wasn't only for the brokers. That's part of the reason why it's a separate system. So the JSE couldn't offer us the same system that they have licensed specifically for South Africa. So we went with a vendor called STT, Securities Trading Technologies. They're our vendor in the CSD as well as in the bond trading system. That they've been quite active in the last couple of years all over the world. We went through a very competitive process together with the central bank to determine the vendor, because the central bank is 49% owner of the CSD together with us, we've been having 51%. And initially we wanted to do the CSD first and then launch the trading, but because we had to wait for the CSD license, we swapped that one around. And like I said, it's early days, but the banks are also participants in it. It's not only the stockbrokers, because a lion's share of the trading currently in OTC fashion is being done by the banks. So this creates the opportunity for on-screen trading, to create a better competitive market, and hopefully for buyers and sellers to get a better deal instead of just a phone call.
Yeah, instead of just being a call around market, which is quite good. And tell me, a little bit about the dynamics then of your market base. Your investors predominantly retail still, or do you have a mix with institutional buyers?
So for our local pension funds and long-term insurance funds, there's regulations requiring 45% of their holdings to be invested locally.
Marvelous.
So a fair amount of that goes into bonds, but also, of course, into the equities. And that's actually where the dual listeds have a small percentage that also counts as a domestic asset. So that's always been the carrot for some of the international companies, largely from Johannesburg, but we also have from Mauritius, Australia, Toronto, and London. Some of those companies also dual list on the NSX, because they qualify for a portion of that domestic asset status. And especially the ones that have operations in Namibia, it suits them well to be listed locally as well. So there's quite a lot of those.
Very interesting altogether that you should have such a powerful pool of listings. But certainly I think the domestic investment by the pension funds, by the institutional investors, mandating that gives you a huge leap forward, because therefore you've got essentially a pool, if not a wall of money that's sitting around that's going to go into your marketplace as you list stuff. And that's obviously going to be very exciting, because that pool's going to grow. But at the same time, hopefully your listings are going to grow with remarkable alacrity across the board as the economy grows with the oil that's going to be soon pumped onshore. And that's going to be a very, very interesting dynamic.
What I foresee is that the exchange is going to be the obvious place to raise capital, because the capital requirements that are going to be necessary for some of these projects are going to be immense. So you're going to have your shells and your totals that are going to do whatever they need to do, but all the ancillary services around that will need a lot of infrastructure and a lot of investment and movable assets and everything else. So whether it's the banks that raise capital to lend, or whether it's companies raising capital to be able to do what they need to do within this bigger marketplace, the exchange is going to be central to all of that. And you're going to have new participants coming into this market that have never been here, that can also establish themselves and give themselves a bit of a local foothold by listing and creating an avenue for the pension funds and the likes to actually own a part of the operations that are here. And especially in Africa, it's usually a thing where it's perceived as very positive if there's an effort to localize, not just foreign operations, but to have locals given the access to be part of shareholding and not just potentially laborers and investors in a real sense.
Well, it's very interesting, as you say. I mean, the capital-intensive nature of going out, and particularly with the amount that's going to have to be offshore in order to bring the oil onshore, that's a huge amount of infrastructure in itself. But just the accommodation that's going to be required for the workers and the ability to shuttle stuff back and forward to and from the rigs is going to be a very, very substantial amount of growth, let alone the excitement that's going to take place. I mean, you can look at the city impacts that took place on places like Aberdeen in the north of Scotland, which was essentially semi-God-forsaken until they discovered North Sea oil in the middle of the 1970s. And suddenly it had some of the most expensive property in the UK. And not unreasonably so, because it's a beautiful place and quite incredible. It just happened to be right at the opposite end of the UK island from London and the places where most of the business was happening, which was previously its problem. And that's going to be very, very exciting in terms of how that spend can hopefully benefit all of the country. Now, just changing gear for a minute, I'm going to give you a rest for a second there, Tiaan, because you've been talking a lot for the course of the last half hour. Let's move, ladies and gentlemen, to our book of the week this week. And our book of the week is Fiasco, the insider story of a Wall Street trader. It's a book by Frank Partnoy, who I hope actually will manage to get on the show one of these days. Very, very interesting guy, Frank. It was a groundbreaking book at the time and remains somewhat of a shocking story. It's all about the education of one man, one trader in, as he put it, the jungles of Wall Street. It's a very, very interesting read. Certainly puts a lot of things into a lot of perspective about how Wall Street worked, particularly 30 years ago. Well worth a read. That's our book of the week. If you'd like to catch up with what's going to be our book of the week next week, don't forget you can sign up free of charge for Exchange Invest's Weekend Edition, EI Weekend. You can sign up for that via exchangeinvest.com. While you're there, though, ladies and gentlemen, why not consider a subscription? And we're offering a free trial of 30 days without a credit card or any other information to anybody who would like to sign up for the Exchange Invest Daily Newsletter, the newsletter of the Bourse Business. And we'd be delighted to welcome you to our subscriber numbers. So moving back, Tiaan, to the whole Namibian picture, I mean, it's going to be very, very exciting, but explain to me a little bit about what's the makeup at the moment of sort of the retail investor base within Namibia?
So during our last couple of IPOs, the retail base has certainly expanded, although it's coming off a small base in any case to start with. But you find that on the trading side of things, almost 95% of the trading would be done with institutional funds. Mm-hmm. And then, but you're seeing with every IPO, and I know these numbers are small, but if you started off a couple of years ago with an IPO, you probably would have had about 5,000 at most, 5,000 retail applicants, and now you're looking at about 10,000. So there's definitely been growth and more appetite from the retail side of things, and we're seeing. We've done a lot of education. We tried to do a lot of education, and with every IPO, that's a real good opportunity to try to spread the message wide. And last year or 2 years ago, we had MTC, the first mobile telecommunications company, which was a state-owned enterprise that actually came to market as well, which is a big step from a theoretical perspective for government to take the step to actually sell off some of its shareholding and some of its direct control in a state-owned enterprise was a major step. And we've seen that in some of the African markets, but not a lot. And that's probably one of the biggest opportunities in Africa, is to privatize some of the state-owned enterprises and potentially have them run more productively, more profitably, and for government to let the private sector do some of the things that it does best.
Yes, very interesting, the possibility for much more privatization. Certainly something that was a huge wave that was the making of the likes of the Polish Stock Exchange during the course of the 1990s, for example. Could be very, very exciting there as that goes forward for Namibia. So, I mean, at the moment, just run us through it sectorally. You have a lot of mining, extraction, diamond-related mining, uranium mining, and so on. What's the long tail of listings that you've got on top of these glorious telecom companies and so on?
So financial services, there's quite a few in terms of the biggest banks in the country. as well as some of the smaller ones that focus more on micro lending. Then there's the property sector. There's a company listed there, like I say, the telco, and an ICT company that is partially in telco, but more so into fiber and some of the other areas in the ICT sector. Of course, the breweries that I spoke about that Heineken just bought a substantial stake in. Maybe if we go to the slides there, I can talk a little bit about what happened there on the performance with the exchange. On the bond side, there's a few corporate bonds, also mostly from the banking sector, and then some state-owned enterprises, but plenty of government issuances, going even to a fairly long-term yield curve, which I suspect might actually even stretch out further soon enough, now that the sentiment has changed as much as it has.
Ladies, I think
So
we've
yeah,
got a
there's a fair
slide
mix.
there somewhere Tiaan's looking for. Sorry to interrupt. Oh, here we go. Right,
No,
here
that's
we
fine.
go. Good, good,
So
good.
there, just looking at the banking sector there, you can see just between deposits and advances, it's a fairly strong picture. So you've got a pretty good mix there between everything as well. Mortgage loans usually being the biggest side of it, but I suspect the corporate finance side is probably going to go up quite a bit as we proceed. If you're moving on to the next one there, just go back one. There we go. So that's just our plotting out of the different sectors, how they've performed over the last couple of years. And you'll see if you go to 2014, the NSX local index was the best performing one. Then it had some, didn't stay up top, but it did fairly well. But if you look at the last one in 2023 at the right top side, you'll see the NSX local did 42%.
Wow.
That's not too shabby, even in local currency terms. That's not bad. While you would see the NSX overall, that has a bunch of those dual listings in there, mostly Johannesburg Stock Exchange listings, and that was the worst performing one. So there's a clear differential that I think is appearing, and we're seeing it on the bond pricing. Namibian bonds were also always more expensive than South African bonds, and for the last year, we've seen Namibian bonds be cheaper than South African bonds. So there's a whole market change in terms of the investor appetite, and we're starting to see flows from South Africa into Namibia while they're not comfortable with the risk profile there. And with the currency peg being what it is, the risk profile in Namibia is starting to look a lot better. So this does give you a little bit of a sense as to how things have been moving. And I mean, obviously during COVID, it was a nightmare. So 2019, 2020, you'll see the NSX local being right at the bottom there. And that's when those international funds went out. Now, what is interesting is even with the results that we're seeing here now, not a lot of international funding has come back. Some South African money, sure, but none of the real international funds, emerging market funds, are really back in Africa. And I think there's definitely just things like what we're doing now. There's a need for the Namibian story to get out there to understand where the opportunities lie, because I think there's a great growth opportunity coming. And then if we just look at the next slide there, then it goes a line by line on some of those local listings that I was talking about. So breweries is right at the top. Of course, they had a special dividend coming out of there when the Heineken transaction went through. So, but even in spite of that, still very positive. First Rand Namibia, that is the RMB group. That's their Namibian operations. Big South African bank, First Rand. Capricorn Group is a local banking group. Their retail bank is called Bank Windhoek. Also having a very positive result there. Mobile telecommunications, I spoke about, that's NTC, the telco. RX Properties is the property company. Anirep is a renewable energy company that came to market by way of a SPAC. That's still very early days for them, so to be expected there. And then Standard Bank Namibia made some changes within their group and their organization and really shot the lights out, which is beautiful. Stimulus is a pref share that has a kind of a set repayment model, so you don't see a lot of price fluctuation there. Paratus is the ICT group that I was talking about, which is heavily capitalized and spending a lot of capital right now in terms of rollout and fiber and the rest of it. So probably not necessarily seeing the price movements yet that would be coming through there. The Tejo is a microfinance one that you could see the positive effect of the distribution changes showing there. Namibia Asset Management is a local asset management company that's done well for a long time. And Nictus Holdings is a diversified holdings group from furniture to vehicles, etc., even some corporate finance in there. So it's a nice mix. There's a little bit of everything in there. And the bottom line is the last couple of years coming out of COVID has been very positive. It's very good.
That's fabulous. That really is a very, very remarkably broad-based exchange you've got, and it's really good to see, because hopefully, as you say, with the rising tide, hopefully raising all the boats as the oil money gushes through, it's going to be quite exciting. Let me just interrupt, ladies and gentlemen. I say we got a lovely message come through from Neil Crammond, direct from Epsom Hospital, commenting on his predicament. He says it allows me to read and watch a bit more while on bed rest. You take care of yourself, Neil Crammond. It's really, really good to hear from you, Neil. I hope you're getting better. Delighted to hear that the nurses are giving you a great opportunity to convalesce, and we look forward to speaking to you soon. I'm really sorry to have heard about your accident. Good luck to Neil Crammond. We have a question at the same time for Tiaan, which is quite interesting as we discuss this whole fascinating topic of unlocking Namibian growth. Anberg, our commodities doyen, thanks for imparting your eye-opening knowledge and experience. Given Namibia's huge reserves of energy, can you describe coordination or struggles with climate groups?
Again, early days, I'm sure we'll have lots more interaction with them. Interestingly enough, just when I joined the exchange, I was involved in the project where we wrote the corporate governance code for Namibia. It's called the NAM code, which is very much based on South Africa's King code. And part of what we put in there that wasn't in King 3 at the time was the requirement for broader stakeholder taking cognizance of broader stakeholder groups than just normally your bottom line shareholders, employees, etc. So with specific mention of the environment, because in our constitution, the protection of the environment is actually written in as a fundamental right that has to be taken into account. And over the last couple of years, where sustainability has become really the flavor of the month, with everybody trying to find ways to bring that into their listing requirements, reporting requirements, and everything else, we passed a directive under the NAM code that requires a sustainability committee as a subcommittee of the board to force it to be part of the strategy of every company. Now, the corporate governance code is obviously obligatory to listed companies, but it's also followed widely through all other business forms, even government with some parts of it. So as a corporate governance code, we've kind of been ahead of this. And as much as we haven't dealt with climate groups much yet, I'm sure we will interact much more going forward.
Very interesting answer. Thank you very much. Very interesting question. And thank you very much for that, as I certainly think it is going to be somewhat interesting. Fascinating, as I might have mentioned on this show before, but it was a great story, Tiaan, was I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum, had a fantastic exhibition in London a couple of years ago, all about oil and how it had powered the automobile generation century, and therefore how that had changed the world. Very, very good, well thought through exhibition. The only foible to it was that when you got to the end of it, there was this counter which showed you how little oil there was left. And actually, the difficulty was that thanks to discoveries in the likes of Namibia and so on, during the course of that time, actually the amount of oil that was available had increased rather than decreased, which was the only thing that the curators had got wrong, where they'd done some very nice stylish cars and lots of fascinating automotive history. So it's always quite curious for all parties concerned. But it's going to be, obviously, I mean, that's quite an incredible amount of oil to be bringing out. I mean, the idea that there's something like 15 billion barrels at least down there, that's going to be a huge amount of resource. What's the situation there in terms of, do you have to build a complete set of infrastructure for refining, or are you going to be able to take advantage of refining capacity in nearby countries?
No, there's nothing close by. Just to touch on the first point, what is interesting, like I said, Shell has been looking for 25 years, but they were only able to quite recently go out this deep into sea and then go down as deep as they had to get to where the holdings are. So the technology has actually changed as much that what we thought was available probably 15 years ago was fair. But now that we can go out so deep and go down so deep, that picture could change everywhere. And as I understand it, they're drilling all over the place. This is what they do with that arm of the business. And if they have a 5% success rate, then it's a massive success.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot more drilling going on for a long time. That much is clear. In the Namibian setup, yes, so it's far out to sea and it's deep down. So they'll have to ship the oil from where it's pumped out, probably to Walfish Bay or to Lüderitz. That's part of what all the consultants are looking at, what the best way is to bring it out, whether you pipeline it or just ship it out. And then the next question is, do you build a refinery here, or do you just ship it out straight to somewhere else to do it, which is not close by? Even Angola, with all its oil reserves, doesn't refine.
Right. That's going to be a very interesting set of math and possible developments, and certainly a very interesting opportunity for the stock exchange if you can manage to get in there to fund and create that infrastructure, which is quite remarkable.
Beneficiation would be massive. To not only work on raw products, but to beneficiate it or to refine it in some form to send out a next generation product has been one of the goals of government for a long time. So we've been through this with diamonds, where we used to only have raw diamonds going out. Now it's at the position where there's some sorting, cutting, polishing, etc. going on in country. And for most of the industries, that's been a drive to try to bring some of that beneficiation into the country. With something like uranium, that's not necessarily always the easiest thing to do. And for some of the other raw materials, there's different levels of what you can achieve. But for oil, I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation soon.
Yes, a hugely interesting conversation. And the good news also is, of course, that it's not as if you've got tens of millions of people who are all going to be complaining about it happening in their backyard. You have a little space to expand into if you need a few acres here and a few acres there. Yes.
Yeah, I think we'll find a spot for it.
You won't be a huge struggle in the overall action plan. People turning around and going, no, that was green desert. You can't possibly build anything or do any value add to the oil cycle there. I can totally get that. It's really, really exciting to hear all of these sorts of stories. So tell me, I mean, you talk about the fact that there's quite a lot of financial services within Namibia and so on already, and that's been quite a significant sector to you. You mentioned, and I've forgotten the number now, but you mentioned earlier on how many brokers there actually are to your exchange, which is quite remarkably high. How have they built up, and what are their prospects for the future in terms of how they build that whole financial sector, do you think?
Okay, so like I say, on the stockbroking side, there's only 4 active trading brokerages. Right. Some of them have hooked up with larger groups in South Africa. Most of them have affiliations. They certainly have associates all over the world, in terms of which trading can be done here and then through the dual listings in the other jurisdictions. But they do a lot of diversified work. So besides doing sponsor work and bringing IPOs to market, the obvious stockbroking trading side, there's a lot of corporate finance advice that's being done even in the unlisted space, and also they've brought ETFs. We've just done ETNs. We just launched 10 ETNs through the First Rand Group, whereby our local retail participants can invest in Alphabet, Meta, MSCI Worldwide, etc., through this ETN structure. Because for our local retail investors especially, it's not necessarily that easy to open up an international trading account. I know in many jurisdictions it's not that easy. So these products actually make it possible for them to get that exposure and use it as a currency hedge. So there's a lot of diversification going on, and there's a lot of the stockbrokers and then the banks are all actually working in tandem to grow the market and to get us moving in the right direction. And I think a part of that because of the obvious advantages that we see that's going to come in the next couple of years, if we can prep our market sufficiently to have all the infrastructure such as the CSD in place, that by the time we have this rise, our infrastructure is in place and our market is well enough diversified and developed to offer whatever it needs to the market when the need arises.
What an exciting vision for the future, all being backed up by not merely this huge land mass and a relatively modest population of 2 million people, but the prospects of $15 billion of oil. We've reached that point in the show, Tiaan Bazuin, where we've been unlocking Namibia's growth for the course of the last hour. Let me ask you, where do you think the capital market revolution goes next?
Well, I'm looking at from a very subjective point, and I think for at least in terms of the region goes, Namibia is going to be the center of the universe for the next couple of years, and it's going to be a very interesting ride. Capital markets in the broader sense, there's a lot of technological changes. I don't really want to say the word blockchain, but there's clearly going to be changes in terms of how some of our clearing and settlement systems are done. I've had a plan for a while that I think there can be more infrastructure sharing between exchanges, especially small exchanges such as we have in the region, where we don't need separate licenses for these markets. And there's all kinds of harmonization and interconnection projects that are underway that could be interesting, and there could be solutions coming out of that, whereby we can lower our cost and hopefully lower our cost of trading in turn, and create more liquid markets and be more attractive to those international investors that should come back.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to say, I love a good African growth story, and I don't think I've seen one better than we've got in Namibia right now. Tiaan, you're a great salesman and diplomat for the country, but at the same point in time, it's that $15 billion of oil, the 15 billion barrels of oil that are sitting behind you that somehow or other give us all cause for a great deal of optimism in Namibia's future, notwithstanding
It helps.
Exchange. Yes, it definitely does. Yes, yes, absolutely. Reminds us of that great joke between why did the Irish end up with the potatoes and all the people in the Middle East have so much oil? Because the Irish got first choice. Before anybody decries me as a racist, let me say I'm an Irishman. So the point, I think, Tiaan, is that you have an amazing dynamic economy. You've got a sensationally large land mass. You've got some incredible coastline, and out to sea, there's this amazing black gold, which is going to transform the country on top of the existing great opportunities that still exist in the diamond business, the uranium business, presuming the uranium price stays above $70, as you say in particular. It's a very, very exciting picture. Thank you very much, Tiaan Bazuin, for joining the show and talking about unlocking Namibian growth. I look forward to checking in with you and hearing how things are going as you go along, and good luck with demutualization and also dematerialization and lots of other exciting things on your agenda. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to say we're going to be welcoming back Hamish Adurian from Sonara. We're going to be talking about the holistic exchange and operational resilience. I'm really looking forward to that show, particularly as I might be in a slightly warmer climate than chilly Poland, where I am today. Although at the same time, chilly Poland this time in February is actually remarkably warm, because most days it's been in positive degrees, which is a minor miracle for the course of this trip. We're looking forward to that show next week. Thank you very much, Tiaan, for your show today. I would like to thank all of our commenters, particularly Mary Anberg. Thank you for that great question. And indeed, Neil Crammond. Get well soon, Neil Crammond. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thanks for watching this IPO-VID number 133. We'll be back next week with Hamish Adurian. I wish you all a great week in life and markets.